Andrés, thank you so much for having joined us at Alacero once again. Yeah, you know, we are all dying to hear you. So first, I have to say, after Ricardo's presentation, I'm speechless, wordless, because I'm going to say what he has said already. I will add a few comments here and there, but all the basic stuff has been said by him. So what's coming is complex, and consequences, well, depend on elections, the situation, the scenario, China, and less on us, even if it was very positive about Brazil's tax reform. And it will also depend on how Latin America plays this game. Oh, well, that's been very positive about the will of the countries. And I want to begin with a map, a map of global development. Blue, developed countries. Red, the doomed countries. Orange, those of us which might have a chance. A week ago, 3 economists were awarded a Nobel Prize because they say that institutions determine development. So what does this mean? It's not geography. It's not specific policies, more than policies. I mean, respecting the right to property, for the long term. I will question these Nobel Prize premises. You are familiar with Latin America, many are familiar with Europe. Can anyone imagine that maybe Greece or Italy have better institutions than Uruguay or Chile? Development depends on power. Some pioneer developed countries invented the steam engine, fences, but also they had slaves. Great Britain, the UK, dominated certain areas. France, the Netherlands, developed to survive, to compete against the UK. The rest of the development is a legacy. Australia, Canada, New Zealand. So you see the offspring of the UK colonies which have become independent. And thirdly, guests, those who have been invited to the party were Eastern Europe, Eastern Asia, Israel, those countries, who had to develop. That's an invitation. The pioneers, the children of the pioneers and the guests. This means that Latin America will never develop, that we will never have an Asian tiger. Well, no, it doesn't mean this. This means that if the argument is right, we have to be useful to developed countries, not as servants, but they should find us useful. That's what I mean. Latin American shows little usefulness. It's a fragmented region. Mexico is different from South America because we speak about nearshoring, friendshoring, but near is a geographical proximity concept. Mexico is close to the state, not South America. The Americas have a vertical axis, we would say. But the world does not see Latin America as a unit because it's not a unit. So this is the world of the future, just a projection for 2075, a post-Western world. Here, Asia has 65% of the economy. And that is not reality, you might say. But today, Asia has 60% of all the population in the world. 40% is the rest, Africa, Latin America, etc. The US will remain a power, China as well. Then India, another powerhouse. And this will impact on the long term, not next year, but in 10 years, 20 years, India will be, the topic of this kind of summit, like China today. And Latin America is all those little yellow balls, not too relevant, you see? Well, relevance doesn't matter. They should be prosperous. We should flourish. But for that, we have to sell to those big balls there. And this is what has been happening in recent years. Ricardo has shown this. And here we can see more clearly the regions, the growing regions in the world, and those which do not grow. And you see Turkey, India, Ireland is an exception, China, maybe Malaysia, Taiwan, like China, Indonesia. All of that is Asia. The world that grows is in Asia. Africa grows, regarding population. Latin America is from the center to the right. And Europe, here in the same half, on the right half. Europe is declining. Latin America, well, here you don't see the decadence. But Germany, you see one of the worst economic results in the last 5 years. And Germany is the European industrial powerhouse. What's the problem? The main European powerhouse, but depended a lot. Base energy gets cheap gas from Russia. Efficiency was not the result. Commerce, trade from China. So Germany depended on the states for defense. And there's a moral dependency on Israel. So Germany, you see this economic engine and can take Europe to development. It depends on foreign powers. But the thing is, something else is happening. If you talk to European decision makers, they say we have to do this in order to buffer decadence in Europe. But Ricardo did not mention Europe. So who matters? China, the US, and India, increasingly so. How important are we for ourselves? So let's see first the world. This guy was an American researcher. If you don't know your country, you don't know any country. We only know when we compare. You are tall. You are neither tall nor short if you are the only human being in the world. So I will not only speak about steel, and I will also mention other regions to compare with Latin America. This represents 20 years. 20 years is just a drop in the ocean. And China went from nothing to the summit of the world. You see, in 20 years, China is there. You see, suddenly, exports skyrocketed, and you see other industrial powerhouses, stagnation. You see? These are exports, and here we extend the time frame. That covers 40 years, not 20. You see the growth in the case of China, incomparable, never before. And if this has happened in a tiny country, the impact was limited. Ireland, with 4 million inhabitants, well, this is good for Ireland. If this happens in China, with billions of people, well, that affects the global economy. They don't need to adjust. And India is not there yet, but here it's India there. See, little India there. Electricity, electric or energy generation. You see proximity. And this shows how the economy is performing. So you see the stagnation around the world. China, India, you see, they are going ahead. And something which is key, the economy in the future, the past relies on technology. China is making a contribution. If you see a telephone, a mobile, apps, you will see 80–90% come from the US. Maybe a few from Latin America, Spotify from Sweden. But if in China we ask the same thing, 90–95% will be Chinese apps, like two parallel universes, like a metaverse. And Europe, nowhere to be seen. So there are consequences. Cars. Car making shows the future of the economy. I mean, in steel, technology, loss of labor, and international trade. All of that is included in your car. You see? Especially if we speak about electric vehicles, that has to do with the transition, and this affects mining. You see the size of the circles that shows sales. And you see whether they export or not. China, you see, far away, leading, exports a good percent, unlike others who only sell domestically. What I want to show is this. China, Europe, 6 years. Blue, electric vehicles from Europe to China. And black, return, the opposite. All of this has happened in 6 years. The world changed in 20 years, over 20 years, and this will become more intense with a stronger focus on Asia. We live in a post-Western world, and we have not noticed this because we are still Western people. We live in our own corner, and we believe or think that the world changes a little, but it is a huge transformation that will radically change Latin America. And a radical change that does not mean worse. Many of these changes can be very positive, but that will depend on certain conditions, changes, requirements, and especially where we are positioned, in north or south of Panama. And this is another example of what, the fragmentation caused by what's going on in the world. Latin America is the only region in the world whose name does not describe only its geographical situation. When we see Latin America has a cultural element. America has to do with the geography, and Latin has to do with the culture. We are not the US. But sometimes we speak about the Western Hemisphere as if the Americas was a unit. But the new Silk Road includes Asia, except for India. And this covers Africa. You see, Europe, well, Italy is part of it, but no longer now, I would say. And Latin America, there were two recent Latin American presidents, Milei and Bolsonaro, who said nothing with China, no business with communists. But the two have radically changed, with whether we like it or not. Bolsonaro conditioned by the military and the agribusiness. And in both cases, and Milei with more will, who has recognized the importance of China. Countries will be joining this new Silk Road. Even if they do not do so, there will be bigger dependence on China. You don't believe me? Well, look at the numbers. These are decades, different decades, you see? From the 80 to 2000. Yeah, the trade, Latin American trade with other regions, always growing with China. This does not mean that trade with India is very significant. It only means that it's increasing more than with Europe or the US. And what I want to underscore is that intra-regional trade is shrinking. Latin Americans trade less and less among ourselves for many reasons, because we all produce the same thing, soybean. Yeah, no complementary businesses. This is a simplified graph, only Latin America. And you see Latin America is becoming less relevant to itself. This is a macro description, general networks. If a business has steel in Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, well, can take advantage of nearshoring with the US. But for that, you have to swim against the current. The forces of segmented globalization will cause fragmentation in Latin America. Martin said that globalization or regionalization, a little bit of each, segmented globalization, and this segmentation relies on geography. In Latin America, culture brings us together, but geography sets us apart. I would say more trade with the US and less trade with others. This is a kind of map of the region. 20 years of economic growth. Over 20 years, the first 20 years in the century, you see lots of growth in Panama. Peru, a success story. Vertical axis, political stability, above lots of stability. You see Uruguay. Instability doesn't only depend on elections, also, terrorists. Venezuela, you see? Yeah? You see the little arrow showing you that it should be even closer to the bottom. You see Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, lagging behind. If we had a look 40 years ago, France and Germany, they were the leaders. You see, and here the big countries in Latin America, you see, they are like ballast. There is no contagion capacity among the leaders in Latin America. Of course, the positive numbers shown by Brazil show that there are opportunities that can be taken advantage of. But what are the forces? Regionalization. This is important. I simplified the title, remember, for the presentation. So, sorry. There, thank you. The important thing is to realize that in Latin America, there is an ongoing trend, economic dependence. What happens in Latin America depends on what happens around the world. But for the first time ever, we are politically autonomous. No matter what madman is ruling the country, whether a student leader like Boric, a former guerrilla leader, anarcho-capitalist, or a defender of the 64 movement like Bolsonaro. No matter what happens in Mexico, grassroots elections, that doesn't change anything. The US, Russia, China, economic dependence, political autonomy like never before. You see, we are learning to manage these contrasts. What remains is social turmoil, poverty, inequality, and people sometimes go out to the street to protest. Argentina measures poverty differently than in other countries. If we use the same system, this is the picture, I would say. It's not a tragedy. The problem is the perception from different social sectors. For those at the bottom, it is a tragedy, of course. But in the meantime, global trade will help or make things difficult. This is the Brazilian case, the biggest country, and not necessarily setting the trade. In the South, yes, but not in Latin America. 30% is the economic dependence with China. The US, 11. And then in the region, then Argentina, tiny number. Presidents don't get along well. Diplomats get along well. Societies as well. Industrialists and business people also. No conflict in trade, but not a lot of friendship there. Mexico, you see, that's different. Mexico has a strong relationship with the US. So, going back, and to show some differences, South America, Argentina and Brazil, not only industry, but here, the primary sector, where things can be done differently. You see, cows, exports, you see, 97 onwards, you see the variations, all the oscillations. So far, I have shown fragmentation between North and the South in Latin America. But there are more or less favorable policies. In this case, this is good for beef, primary sector. Same thing with soybean, yellow Brazil. Blue Argentina. This means two things. Argentina could do things better. Secondly, both countries have to do things better at the industrial level. Otherwise, they will go back to the primary sector focus. And it's not because we have resources only. Here, 39 of the biggest resources. You see, let's forget about this red circle around Argentina. Out of 39, China is a leader in 17, the main producer of the 17 main commodities. Latin America sometimes well positioned, sometimes not. We don't take advantage and we don't add value, others do. And partly, happens because of the world. What you can see now are the new cocaine trafficking routes. Until a few decades ago, the best drug in the world was produced in our region. The US decided they could do it synthetically. So now to the south and then to Africa and Europe. What's the consequence? The economy is more and more globalized. What we produce, we sell it in Asia, the US, Europe, and security is more regionalized. The threats are along the borders, the markets on the other side of the ocean. And this changes the political interconnectivity. Before, we had a homogeneous situation. Europe created the market, police, provided security, and there was freedom to circulate around the market. This is not so, especially in Latin America. Organized transnational crime, forces states to get organized and to coordinate. Inter-industrial trade and not interstate trade now. And this has to do with some other situation. I will finish in 4 minutes with a focus on politics. What's the impact of this fragmentation? And what's the impact of politics on these economic processes? Here you see 4 countries, South Korea, US, Germany, UK. Red, that's the ideological behavior, attitudes, preferences of young women, and blue, young men. What we see in the developed world, not China, not India. We see that for the first time ever, there are some people who are more reactionary than parents. Normally youngsters have hormones. They are more revolutionaries, I would say. We lose hormones. We have a house, a family, a car. Young women remain like this, more progressist. But young men are more reactionary than their parents. There are 2 reasons: a backlash against political correctness, exacerbated feminism, wokeism. And secondly, is that they got divorced. Digital bubbles, young men, young women. Influencers are different. Male men are like Millet and girls like Taylor Swift. One's aggressiveness and the other's peace and love. Does this matter? We might wonder. The political consequences are radical and social consequences even more so. Men and women, have a romantic relationship later, get married later, have children later, if they have children, fewer children, or no children at all. And this results in demographic collapse. All the countries we can mention now, most of Latin America, with few exceptions, Europe, the US, Japan, Korea, are facing this demographic collapse. If it were not for immigration, the population would shrink. So this causes a cultural reaction because we need immigration, but culture rejects this. So votes follow those principles. And there is a connection here. You see this demographic divorce. If we have to solve countries, you have one homogeneous quadrant, young men. The other three quadrants are like the rest of the world, but young men are determining political processes. And partly this is simpler. You see, 40 years, how do young people live? Blue line, 2025 in the past. 2025, they were married, having a family with children, and now they are not married, have no children, live with their parents. Red line, UK, the US. Causes, well, varied. The division between the genders, the increase in the prices of house. Yeah, consequences in dissatisfaction.
This is manifested at the elections. So this is what we've been seeing since 1980 to 1990, 40 years of electoral participation and social protest. Participation at the ballot box declines, and more people protest after voting. We vote and we are already dissatisfied, and this is key to understanding the dynamics between China and the United States. Which country is more democratic, China or the US? Objective response, some people vote and choose governments, and the others don't. There are more Chinese saying that China is democratic than Americans saying that U.S. is democratic. They themselves consider that China is more democratic than the U.S. And in Latin America, we are undergoing a similar process. Talking about Uruguay and ballotage, there were 16 presidential elections in the 4 last years. We had winners of parties that had existed only for 10 years. Historical parties in Latin America are being massacred by new parties in Mexico and Argentina. And this is happening in France and in Italy as well. Macron, Meloni, the elite parties that didn't exist in the year 2010. What happens in Latin America is not only in Latin America. The impact in Latin America is that it fragments us and divides us north from south. And what comes next? They had promised me about transitions in the images, and they didn't provide them. But let me summarize. If Trump wins, we are going towards a different type of war than if Kamala Harris is elected. If Trump wins, we will go from conventional war to protectionism, to taxes. Is this good or bad for Latin America? It depends. The best thing that can happen to us is that Trump imposes sanctions on China and that China needs to buy soybeans, wine from Argentina because U.S. increased their prices. But they promised to end the war in Ukraine. If they do, they will export cereals and put down the prices. What's convenient for us? We need to be on the alert. We need to calculate what we win, what we lose. No result has a clear impact. We are following this with an open mind, but we know that the impact is going to be there on everybody and everyone. So we are switching the electoral system in Latin America because of fraud allegations. And fraud, people believe that fraud exists, even though it doesn't. In the first democracy of the world, it happens. Thank you.
Hay algunas preguntas que vienen de público. Yo tenía primero una pregunta que...
I had a question for the audience. Your presentation was very clear. Many uncertainties, of course, you coincide with us on that there is an opportunity and there are challenges. If they call you to be an advisor of the government of Latin America, what would you say about how we need to deal with China, with Europe, with the U.S., and what chances do we have of closing agreements in the 3 agreements? This is an excellent question that has a controversial answer. Some people believe there's no margin to challenge those who lead and who control. We need to align with them and not to challenge them. No country may impose sanctions that be prohibitive for Latin America. China could have withdrawn the swap, but nobody wants to damage Argentina. And Argentina is the country who's seeing what to do. Latin America is looking at us, and the president is traveling shortly. He had promised not to go to China, but he became pro-China all of a sudden. I would recommend having 1 million friends, because Latin America needs everyone and everybody. They need finance, they need investments, they need the markets, and they need geopolitical peace. They need, and they do have, geopolitical peace. There is war in Africa, Europe, and Asia. We don't have that. We have 20 countries since the UN was created in 1945. Europe had 14 founders. Today it has a lot more. And Africa has 50 members today. It started with less. We have to diversify partners and opportunities. If you close up to countries and other opportunities, you lose. Another question, if you see the demographic reduction in all countries, why do we still say there are a lot of people in the world and this is a serious problem? This is the Malthus vision of economy. Malthus, an economist, used to say that population reproduces faster than production, that we will have more people than food. But this never happened because technological innovation is faster than demographic growth. And most of the world reached the peak. Africa is still growing. If you remove Africa from the planet, we won't grow anymore. And Africa grows because it's under development. The result is that families are getting smaller and lifespan is getting larger or longer. This is a transition we've never been through before. History is pendular. Things happen once and they never happen again. How can steel industry be the anchor of your value chain and be complementary, as you said? You talked about complementarity. I shouldn't speak about steel alone, but the supply chain interregionally may make steel different from soybean. We will commercialize more intra-Latin America, eliminate the distances of the vertical axis of the continent. Between Argentina, Mexico, and Brazil, the steel may comply with processes at each place and either export to the Pacific or through Rio Grande. But soybean exits Brazil, it goes to China, steel, scrap. We may create a continental steel market. It doesn't make sense to create a continental soybean market. Two more questions. One, Mercosur. At some opportunity, we spoke about these possibilities of relaunching the agreement with Europe, because for us, we see it as an opportunity within the value chain. Today, you said that if you cannot supply the big powers of the world, we will not benefit. So the agreement with Europe is very important, and an agreement with the U.S. is important as well. What possibilities do we have of that? Low possibilities because of the following. We don't have the need for other people's market, same as investments. The EU has more investments in Latin America than China, and they don't need a free trade agreement inclusive from the Mercosur. These are the regulations that make the difference. If they don't comply with the regulations, then they get into the market without suffering from non-tax restrictions. This is not going to happen because of the protectionism in Europe. They have in France agricultural production. They protect the farmers, the values of the community. France doesn't have the possibility of blocking at the EU, but they have political capacity. They never went against the will of France or Germany at the EU. When they dealt with treaties, they could do without Ireland, or they made them vote again, but not with France. And Macron said that this agreement won't happen. What do negotiators say? We are going to break them down. The political part will die at Parliament, and we will do a commerce treaty. And France has 10 friends there that have a veto capacity. So France may block. They can do that. They have that capacity. If things don't come out, it's not because of Milei and not because of Bolsonaro, because they are pro-Mercosur, but it is because of the protectionism of France. Thank you, Andrés, for your presentation. I think you gave us a new vision in many aspects. Thank you.